Hi, I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm David Tamayo.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Now, last week we had Richard Dawkins here, but in addition to that, we had another Richard who was actually introduced as the other Richard, brother Richard Haynes. And he shared with me a story that as a young teenager, his family was not especially religious, but he got religion in a big way, and he was able to lead his entire family to Jesus, as he put it. Years later, as he matured and thought about things and extricated himself, he was very saddened that his family was not able to make the jump back to reality with him. I tell that sort of in a lighthearted manner. It's actually a very tragic and sad story. And that's why I'm especially pleased to have with us today our guest, who's soon to be released a manual for creating atheists, can hopefully help that Richard and people throughout the country, across the world, bring their loved ones and everybody back to the reality-based community where we all need to live. Dr. Peter Boghossian is actually I probably have this wrong the way you didn't want me to say it, but he's full-time faculty at Portland State University in the Department of Philosophy. His doctoral research involved using the Socratic method to help prison inmates learn to use better critical thinking and improve their moral reasoning with the hope of lowering their recidivism rates. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'd like to add...
and if you guys can make sure that Peter's mic is cranked up, we can't hear him in here.
I'd like to add that he has also been referred to as the sexiest philosopher alive. So...
who said that? Who would say such a thing?
That's the word out there. You should Google it.
Sadly, that would be the person that my wife said can be my work wife, who every time I comes in says I'm looking a little bit schlumpy, need to get groomed a little bit better. She muscles me up. So I'm glad she likes you. I'm a little bit hurt, I gotta say.
There you go. And also, before we get started, I'd like to, should we say something about these great uniforms we have today in honor of our guest?
We probably should. We have some images, but we're having some camera problems, so I don't know if we'll be able to get any close-ups on them. And we're going to hit this more later. You talk about street epistemology and how important it is. So we've got our street epistemology, form a cross here with reason saves. So
I love it.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure you get yours.
Thank you.
All right. Now, after Richard Dawkins came to our studio and did the show last week, we followed him over to George Washington University to listen to his talk there. And afterwards, I had the opportunity to interview a few people in the audience to see what they thought of it. And I interviewed a young couple, probably in their maybe early 20s. The boyfriend was Muslim. And both of them pointed out that they were very disappointed that Richard Dawkins didn't seem to take the accusations leveled against him of Islamophobia a little more seriously. As our conversation went on, expanded to with Glenn Greenwald's accusations against Sam Harris. And I did my best to kind of explain how a lot of Harris's comments were taken completely out of context, really inverting their meaning. And I gave the best rebuttal that I could on the fly. A couple days later, I read your chapter number 8, and I wished I read that 2 days earlier. So I was hoping you can maybe dive into that subject a little bit deeper, with Islamophobia, and is that a fair accusation?
Sure. I'm happy to delve into that. I will say that there are two branches or two potential problems. I have not published in one of those areas only as it relates to academia. So Islamophobia, is it possible the image is a little disconcerting to look at myself, the sexiest man alive or philosopher alive?
Hey, if you guys are able to put him back in the box with us too, he'd like that. And if not, I just keep talking, though. If they can do it, they will, and we'll have to go with it.
Okay. So basically, there's Islamophobia as it operates in academia, and there's Islamophobia as it operates politically outside of the academy. And let us be crystal clear about something. And if I weren't on a live TV, I'd use an expletive. There are actually some people who hate Muslims, and these people are idiots. So you have organizations, right-wing hate groups like the EDL, the English Defense League, and they use Islam as a proxy for race. So they are actually racists. Thank you for that. Then in the academy, what you see is something that's complicated, and then I've been studying about it and reading about it, but we have to divorce an idea from a person. And all too often there's confusion about the criticism of an idea versus the criticism of a person. And in contemporary academia, that distinction is completely lost. So I think we saw this recently with the row. I don't know if you've been following Richard Dawkins' tweets with the row over the Jesus and Mo T-shirts. You've been following that?
No, I missed that.
Could you explain that a little bit?
So basically, individuals wore Jesus and Mo T-shirts, and at a university, and other people were offended by that. Jerry Coyne had a nice little blog article about that. Why is it okay, for example, to criticize a Republican ideology or Democratic ideology, but not Islam? Islam is not a race. Islam is an ideology. It's complicated. This is very complicated. I hope we don't lose people. There's a book that I would recommend reading. I have the book right here. It's Islamism and Islam. And so there's Islamism as a political ideology, and then Islam. Islam, the ideas and tenets of Islam should be open to criticism precisely because there are ideas. But Muslims are people. And some people conflate attacking a person with attacking an idea. Was that clear?
Absolutely. I think that you make that point really clear in your book. The separating an idea from a person, I think, is really at the heart of it, because we should be able, if I was asked a question about evolution, I wouldn't be offended, like, how dare you ask about that? I'd be happy to try to explain it. And
right.
So ideas you should be happy to explain.
We should never, ever, ever, ever attack a person because he's a Muslim. Ever. Period. End of story. That's it. Let's move on. However, Islam it's not a race. It's not an immutable characteristic. In fact, there's a word, apostasy, which means people who leave the faith, and sometimes the punishment for that is rather severe, including death. Islam is an ideology. The problem occurs when some people read passages in Islamic texts, and admittedly, there are some passages in the Quran that are very extreme. And what they do then is they tend to have a fundamentalist interpretation of a religion to which they don't even ascribe. So there is no one interpretation of a book. They tend to become fundamentalists with regard to somebody else's religion. The problem is in academia that we've extended dignity as a property of people to a property of ideas. And multiculturalism in particular has contributed to this confusion.
So with multiculturalism, fairly often people in the street, you mention the word and they say, this is somebody that is pro-WASP. This is somebody that is against every other culture, and someone that just wants to be American or whatever. Could you explain a little bit sort of the difference or the definition of multiculturalism and how this applies exactly to what you're talking about here?
Okay, so I'll talk about, there are two separate domains. One is in the political domain outside of the academy, and chapter 8 of my book was Faith in the Academy, where I specifically talk about the problems, both the problems that I've encountered and the problems that I've seen when one attempts to scrutinize a system of thought. You could call it a way people view reality. You could call it ideas in a book. I don't, in general, like the term religion, but I'll step back from your question and say, just as there's no monolithic Christianity, there's no monolithic Islam either. So even within Islam, there are Sunni and Shia divides and different interpretations of scripture, so of the Quran. So multiculturalism in academia is currently not what people who aren't in the academy think it is. In the academy, it's an odd combination of relativism, so that different sorts of thought systems can coexist, and just as different sorts of people of different races can coexist, so can different thought systems. And if you criticize a person's race, which is an immutable characteristic, often you find that in academia, criticizing a person's thought system is looked at as an attack on a person. It is not an attack on a person.
Right. Can you, oh, you got one?
No, I was going to say, so in that sense, it's the definitions that you have in academia. So that chapter 8 is mostly for academia. You mentioned there also something about feminism in there that it made me go, wow, aha, I hadn't noticed this before. Could you tell us a little bit about what you said there and maybe what implications this may have to academia or even to the general public, those of us that call ourselves feminists?
Well, I decided I didn't have enough people who hated me, and I had to up that number. So the problem is that there are parasitic values that have latched on to traditional notions of liberalism. And these parasitic values, extreme tolerance, relativism, they've also latched on to feminist ideology. And there are pretty severe consequences to that and pretty severe problems with that. So feminism, if you look at the history, so the chapter 8 puts people it runs people through a genealogical account of liberalism. Classical liberalism and the manifestation of that today in contemporary academic leftism. Feminism today is a far cry from what feminism was or had emerged from a tradition of liberalism. And one of the problems and the reasons for that is because there have been invasive values that have latched on to feminism and really made it less potent and less respectable than it ought to be. And that's really being quite generous with those terms.
You know, one of the stories that I had pulled up was about a 8-year-old from Yemen, 8-year-old girl,
yes,
who was married off to now. And there's some question as to, you know, the local people said this is a true story. The authorities say it didn't happen, but there's no question that the whole practice of child brides goes on. And so, you know, some 40-year-old guy took this 8-year-old as his wife, and then she, you know, died shortly after from internal injuries. Maybe you can address that. I thought that was the perfect way to, you know, a great example of what you're saying, where with relativism and how it should be very clear to everybody what an atrocity that is. But when we start tolerating the intolerant and saying, well, this is another culture we just don't quite understand, maybe we shouldn't comment on this, right? We're heading down the wrong street. Don't we all need to be very vocal about, you know, genital mutilation, child brides, bride burning?
Yeah, not if you're a member of the academic left, you know. So the problem is that faith has an unwitting ally, and that ally is primarily the academic left, but also the left outside of academia, people who have been indoctrinated by these bizarre academic notions or these parasitic values like relativism. And relativism is the idea that there's no standard by which one can make a judgment about a culture. It's also been coupled with another notion of egalitarianism, in that all cultures, all thought systems, epistemic systems, all ways to come to conclusions are equal. Well, here's one way to think about it. You can't be a relativist and an egalitarian. You can't say that everything is relative and that everything is equal. In the case of that poor child who was raped, and I don't know if you want to affix the term murder to it. I would affix the term murder to it. I don't know if it's first-degree murder. I don't think the man intended to. That Islamic clerics said that the process, this is from what I read about the subject, Islamic clerics said that it is un-Islamic to say that these marriages should not occur. And so leftists defend this practice not only by their silence, but often actively defending these practices under the guise of cultural relativism. But that gets back to your original question, because cultural relativism is a parasitic value that had no place whatsoever in classical liberalism.
Right, so there was like a fatwa issue, right, saying that anybody that tries to oppose this and bring some sensibility to it, I don't know if they branded them, you know, for apostasy, but right, they were being singled out. So there was a very organized effort by the religious leaders to make sure that this practice keeps going on.
Now we see,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, it's much easier to criticize the head count at an academic conference because of the disparity between men and women, and practices that absolutely positively should be condemned. And you need, look, we need to triage these things, right? We need to say, Oh, you're a physician, right?
Long time ago.
Right. There's a system of triage, and we need to talk about, we need to be blunt in talking about these things. And just because people participate in a different culture or have a different skin color who happen to be living in this culture, that doesn't mean we should suspend our judgment about something that's morally horrific. In fact, if anything, that means that we need to develop the tools to make better, more discerning moral judgments. And contemporary academic leftists have not only taught people not to do that, but they've taught them to be sanctimonious as a result of not doing that.
Now, in this chapter, this is a two-part question. One is, obviously this chapter seems to be, targeted the academia and your peers and a lot of other professors, mostly here in America. I mean,
Right.
From what I read, it just says America. Is that correct? Is this your intended target as a whole for the whole book, or just this particular chapter is targeting the academia, but the rest of the book is really for anyone that is of college age, or would you say this is a book also for high school students or anyone?
The only academic quote unquote chapter in that book is the first two parts of chapter 8, and to a certain little extent the rest of chapter 8. The rest of the book is meant for a general audience, and basically this book will give you the tools in no uncertain terms to have a discussion with somebody who is a person of faith, and you can literally talk them out of their faith. You can talk them out of their faith, and you can talk them into reason. And I want to say, these are not Jedi mind tricks. This has been as a result of an exhaustive study of literature across multiple domains of thought. This works, these techniques work, and so it's for a broad audience. And you have a religious or a member of faith, whether the Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door or you're engaged with any person or person of faith on any level, you can use this to talk them out of their faith, or at the very least get them to fundamentally question aspects of their faith, and then in a follow-up treatment you can help them disabuse them of this sickness entirely.
We don't have our graphic for it, that we can't get it up there right now, but can you kind of walk us through, you talk about a roadmap to getting somebody out of this relativistic mindset, and can you kind of walk us through how an encounter would go if somebody's going to try to help somebody see the light?
Yeah, okay. I'd like to give the background for that first,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Sure.
So before we can talk about the problem of faith, often people will say, well, that's just true for me. That's just subjectively true. So many people don't have the tools to discern what's objectively true from what's subjectively true. So there are three types of relativism. The type that we talked about was moral relativism. And that is, there's no way to judge what happens in another culture. There's no way to judge, morally what happens in another culture. And so think about it like this. The tragic, horrible case of that young 8-year-old girl who was raped and then died as a consequence of those injuries. People say, well, you just look at that through your Western paradigm, your perception. You can't make a judgment about cross-cultural things like that. The other type of relativism is epistemic relativism, or relativism in regard to how people think about issues or how people think about problems. It is vital, before you can even really talk about faith, often people will revert to this subjectivity. Well, I like mustard on my hot dogs, you like ketchup on your hot dogs, I like triple pepperoni on my pizza. Those are just matters of taste. My relationship with Jesus is just a matter of taste. It's not a matter of fact or Scientology or what have you. And the book, by the way, leaves the Abrahamic traditions extensively. So how do you disabuse someone of these notions? Well, here, too bad the chart wasn't up, but do you want to go through some of the things?
Yeah, I'd like you to just kind of walk through that. I found it really helpful, the idea of how you approach this and walk through and lead somebody down those, we'll talk more about Doxastic closure later, but just how you lead somebody down the steps toward opening up.
All right, so I have the chart here. So I figured out that almost invariably in 30 minutes, you can disabuse virtually anybody of relativism. It's not hard. Again, it's not magic. So there's a set of questions that you can bring people through. Now watch how gentle these questions are. Is it possible that some people misconstrue reality? Is it possible? Not is it actual, but is it possible? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Now, there are two things people can say, well, there are three, but it's pretty much binary, yes or no. Now, if they say, yes, it is, almost everybody will say yes to that. Then you'll say, do some people actually misconstrue reality, right? So you make the leap from possible to, so you're very gently asking them questions to draw the, yes, it is. Well, can you give me some examples of that? What would some examples be of people who misconstrue reality? At that point, it's very important to let other people provide those examples.
And we're not referring to crazy people in general.
Not people, not crazy people, but people either who have been indoctrinated by my colleagues or people who really don't have a thoughtful inner life. You know, people who just buy the zeitgeist, buy this crazy postmodernist notion that everything is relative. It's so, the emperor needs to be dismasked and disrobed.
I think it's important to point out too that these can be perfectly intelligent people.
Oh, absolutely.
And you need to get them to think critically. That's like a very important thing, is that you're not calling people stupid. You take a very collegial, collaborative approach to help them get to a better place, and you're not calling them dumb. You're just helping them think for themselves.
You're just guiding them.
Right, and then when they realize it, again, they're a partner with you. By the time they get to the end, if they've come along, they've made the discovery with you.
Right. One linchpin of this whole thing is you do not create adversarial relationships. The other linchpin is it's always possible that epistemological relativism is true and someone knows something I don't know. And if I draw them through this template, if I lead them to this template, and they give me evidence for something I didn't have before, then it's incumbent upon me to change my mind. So not only is it not an adversarial relationship, it's a collaborative relationship in which the street epistemologist, or the person helping others to abandon their faith, the street epistemologist is incumbent upon them that they have to be willing to change their mind. And by the way, just doing that one strategy that you can use can help people not only disabuse people of a belief, but they won't throw up a defensive posture. They'll be more likely to change their minds and revise their beliefs. Okay, so we're at stage 2 now, right?
Yeah.
Is it actual, right?
Yes.
Okay, so people provided examples, and then you could say something like, well, that's interesting. Let's say that, and you give an example of a process that doesn't lead to truth. Let's say that Fred believes that if he flips coins, that he can get the answers to his problems. Most people will laugh at that, or you kind of say you can use humor if you're a funny guy.
What do you use?
Looks.
Sexiness.
No, truly, no. I never even heard that until you said at the beginning of the hour. No, so I try to use humor. I try to establish a rapport right away, and that's from literature that's been reverse engineered from evangelical Christians about how to establish these rapports. And there's also some really interesting literature about how to establish rapport. Okay, so then people will say, no, it's not true. And so you say, well, okay, that's really interesting. Well, what if 10 people decided that they could get to the truth of the matter by flipping a coin? Does the number of people who participate in a delusion or a false belief, does that increase the likelihood that the belief will be true?
Yeah.
Now, most people are going to say, no, it doesn't. Okay, well, that's good. We've made significant progress. So then you'd ask another question. And again, the template is just broad. You can modify it accordingly. So then you could ask another question. Well, is one process just as likely to lead to truth as another?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And
then you give an example. Like, let's say that I wanted to figure out, some algebra question. Or let's say I wanted to figure out, a measurement question. Is one like you guys watch the Easter Bunny, right?
Right.
Okay.
You've got your Ouija board option or your measurement option.
Yeah, so we know the Ouija board isn't going to work. And the moment somebody admits that there are certain processes that are worse, by definition, that must mean that there are certain processes that are better.
They're better, yes.
That has to. There's no other possibility there's nothing. Okay, so then what would examples of bad processes be? Okay, so then we throw those out. And again, this is just a template. So you're starting and you're very gently guiding people through this series or through this sequence that culminates in the idea of, wow, one process is better than another. What do these processes have in common? The processes have in common that they're based on evidence. The processes have a lot of things in common among the processes that work and among the processes that don't work. And then from there, you've disabused people of one really pernicious, dangerous form of relativism called epistemological relativism. And again, anybody can do it. It's, as you said before, it's in plain language how to do it. It's not a mystery.
Right, that's, we said before the show, you're probably the most plain-spoken philosopher that I've never met in person, where I've never seen you use jargon to obfuscate things and keep people from understanding. You'll point out, here are a couple of difficult terms we need to understand so we can talk about them. But in reading your book, you spell out exactly where we're going, exactly why we need to go there. I think it's a very accessible book for lay people, and I think it's also, or layperson is probably the wrong word, for people that aren't in the atheist or secular movement or skeptical thinkers already, they can follow through it. For people like myself that are in it, and David too, I also had a bunch of aha moments where you really helped some thoughts crystallize for me. And I forgot which guy I got written down somewhere, but somebody, Michael Shermer, who wrote your introduction, wrote a fabulous preface and said this should be bundled along with Richard Dawkins' God delusion as like necessary software for teaching people how to break people out of their faith delusions. And it really does. You really did such a nice job of laying things out in simple terms. And I'd encourage everybody to go out and read this and have such a better feel for the harm also of going by faith, treating faith as if it's something that's pure and better than actual reason.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. There's really no reason. It drives me nuts when people use words that I can't understand. I was telling you about when I go to these philosophy conferences, I don't understand anything anybody's talking about. Like nothing. I don't understand. And I do this stuff constantly. And so there's something wrong. And I don't think it's, Massimo Palucci said it's not just philosophy, it's other disciplines as well. It was very kind of Shermer to write that introduction, and I'm very grateful. So many people have written books about, the problem of faith and what have you. And those are good books. Those are important books. But it's time to take this whole thing we're doing to a new level. Now it's time to fix the problem.
Well, Peter, that's great. I mean, this has been fascinating. We're going to go for a break right now. Please hang on. We got a lot more to talk about.
Right. Before we cut away, I want to say one more thing. If you want to get an early look at this book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, you can check things out on Amazon and take a look there. We'll see you back in about 3 minutes.
At NASA right now, scientists and engineers are working every day to help humans learn how to better care for our home so that we never have to leave. NASA has a fleet of satellites around the planet that keeps track of climate change and studies how humans are affecting the planet. NASA has a ton of geniuses, and all of them are working for a future that has a healthy Earth in it. Like when NASA helped find the hole in our ozone layer so we could fix it before the problem got out of control, NASA is doing its part. We have to do ours. This is our home. To learn more about how NASA is keeping an eye on Earth, visit www.nasa.gov/Earth.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue. But the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So I just moved in with his family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
Welcome back to Road to Reason. Before we move forward, I wanted to make a couple of announcements. Since I'm sure we're going to be talking until right at the end of the show, I want to tell everyone some events where Dr. Peter Boghossian is going to be soon. So the first one is Peter is going to be talking to Richard Dawkins at Portland State University on October 11th. And second, on November the 3rd, he will be doing a book signing at Powell's Books on Hawthorne at 7:30. Be there. I think you're going to enjoy his company there. And third, Peter's talk from the amazing meeting, TAM 2013, probably one of the best skeptics meetings there is. It has the who's who of a skeptical, who's in the skeptical community, should be releasing on YouTube within the next few weeks. And we'll make sure that we put a link in our website when that happens. I'm looking forward to it. And if you've never seen Dr. Boghossian speak, you really ought to do it. Go on YouTube and look him up. I guarantee you'd enjoy his videos.
Right. You know, it's funny. The videos are actually how I came to know about you. Dr. Andy Thompson from the Dawkins Foundation had been on our show a few months ago and sent me a link saying, hey, Rob, Larry, have you guys ever seen this guy? And I watched it, and it's fabulous. Again, you're very engaging, you're very entertaining, and you're completely understandable, and you say really important things. One of the funny things that I thought you said, you had epistemology is the study of knowledge, meta-epistemology is the study of knowledge. About 200 people in the world are interested in that. My goal is to address the rest of humanity, and I thought that's fabulous. And your book really should be for everybody, whether they're in this movement or not. Everybody should be thinking more clearly. And in that vein, maybe can you start off by telling us, if you want to give any more general overview about the book, who you wrote it for, what your goals are to achieve with the book. And we've touched on some of it, but you can expand.
My ultimate goal is the complete and total eradication of the faith virus. And I know that that's rather ambitious, but I think that this book is a step in the right direction. I'd like to arm maybe 10,000 initial people who take this idea and really run with it every day. And then I want another wave of people, and I'd love to hear about your experiences when you tried a little street epistemology, you tried some of these interventions. But I wrote the book for the people who they didn't know how to deal with when they were approached either on the street or they have a relative who's fallen under some faith-based delusion and they want to help them and they don't know what to do. And I actually wrote the book as well to help those people who are suffering from these delusions. And I have 2 kids. I'm a parent. This is a species-threatening event.
Okay. All right. We're just conversing, so you can next. In terms of my experiences, we've talked a little bit, and we'll get back to more of the book stuff later. I was saying how it's really been incredibly liberating to try to follow some of your advice. We had our Bon Air yearly school fair yesterday, and we had a representative from Chick-fil-A happened to be there walking around, I assume giving out cards and discount stuff. And with the stuff that's come out with the bigotry against gay people from that, I thought it was a little bit inappropriate to have him walking around on the campus. And I actually asked him about it. I started asking, using kind of your Socratic method he talked about, and just asking some questions about, does he think this is reasonable? Is this what he should be doing? How does he feel about what the president said? And I was a little bit less sarcastic than I usually am, a little bit less caustic. It became slightly more of a conversation. And again, instead of feeling sheepish and ashamed that I'm bringing up this embarrassing thing, I felt, this is what I should be doing. We should all be talking about and addressing this. We do have a call, so you can hold that thought in mind for a little bit. We have a call from Eric and Larry from Centerville that we're trying to work in right here. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Doing well. We got a quick question, a couple of questions for Dr. Bogosian here. I want to know what he thinks about Atheism Plus and that new movement that kind of was pretty recent. And also, Eric wanted to know about Socrates, what he thinks about that.
What was the second part of that question?
I want to talk about Socrates.
Socrates? Okay.
Socrates Cafe. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good book. I'll answer the question in reverse order if that's okay. It's a good book. I liked it. I read it. It came out a few years ago. I love the idea of getting groups of people together to have these Socratic discussions. In the book, he talks about one of the things was, what should we have a discussion about? I think it's a wonderful book. I think anything that helps people live more thoughtful and examined lives and throw off dogmatism is good. So that's the first part of your, that's the second part. Now, back to the first part. Atheism Plus, absolutely not a fan. Here's why. There is nothing entailed by being an atheist. Nothing. If, for those of you who aren't, maybe you've just tuned into the station, you're not familiar with atheism, I teach a class at Atheism at Portland State University, and some people in that class have never even heard the word atheism, or they certainly don't know the difference between an atheist and an agnostic. You can think about it like this. An atheist is a person who doesn't think that there's enough evidence to warrant belief in God, but if they were given enough evidence, then they'd change their mind. It has nothing to do with women's rights or homosexuals or anything else. You can think about it in terms of people who don't collect stamps. There are no commonalities among people who don't collect stamps. They just don't collect stamps.
Okay, great. I got to tell you, when I was reading your book, well, let me backtrack a little. I started a PhD program at Virginia Tech in Science and Technology Studies. And what I got over and over and over was getting the idea of having everything is relative. Your knowledge is the same thing as knowledge elsewhere. And I would come home tired of arguing with the professors to the point that after about a year and a half of doing this PhD program, decided that it was just too much. So I wanted to thank you because it validated, after reading this chapter 8, it validated a lot of the things that I had gone through and many of the reasons why I decided that this program was not for me in Science and Technology Studies, which is a branch of sociology. Now you go on your book and you kind of are pretty harsh on the social sciences, on this epistemic relativism. Do you expect there's going to be a lot of backlash from that area once this book comes out?
I do. I think, again, people who subscribe to these forms of dogmatism are just that. They're victims of some kind of a dogmatism. And people don't like it when you challenge their dogmatisms. And so I think, yeah, I am harsh on I'm harsh on the feminists. I'm harsh on, I think Stephen Brutus called it a Molotov cocktail of ideas and denunciations. And chapter 8 certainly is that. But, someone needs to speak about these things. And, hey, look, I'm 47 now. I don't know. I mean, certainly more than half my life is behind me than in front of me. And we all need to do our part to leave. That's what my dad told me, that we need to leave the world better when we leave it than when we came into it. And so frankly, I really don't care what people think. Doesn't bother me at all. So now, if someone has a substantive criticism, then I'm willing to look at that and maybe rewrite parts of the book.
Well, so just in that same vein, I think what you say is very important. We need to change academia because it's veered off. The book doesn't address that. It doesn't address how we should change the academia part. Do you find yourself, have you given this talk or these thoughts to other philosophers, and or have you had any discussions in this respect how should we approach the professors at all the universities in this country and try to change their way of thinking, because we certainly have gone off the deep end in certain parts?
That is a monster question. I mean, I spend so much time thinking about that. So there are so many problems. I mean, part of the problem is that we have to be willing to call, in the hard sciences, people are willing to call things out. and I gave the example in the book about influenza. Well, influenza is a professor's influences. This is theory A of how influenza affects a cell. And the student says, well, that's not my theory. And the professor says, what's your theory? My theory is theory Y. Well, why do you believe, theory Y? Well, I have faith that it's true. No one would give that any countenance. That's insane. So why do we do that in the humanities? Why do we just throw up the red flag? So, I mean, that's one area. The other area is we need to turn academia back into a meritocracy, and it is not a meritocracy right now. People, as long as people are getting hired and promoted on the basis of something other than merit, once you veer from that, the whole system will fall apart.
Yeah, I've been listening to a really interesting book. I'll be quick. We got somebody on the phone by Christopher Hayes about, I'm not sure if it's called Twilight of the Elites, but he talks all about meritocracy, and you really need to build in
defense of elitism, is that it?
Well, his is not in defense of, and I think it's, I'll find the title later. I think, but it's basically, one of the main things he talks about is that a meritocracy of academic scores might be one thing, but if you don't have the equal opportunity going into it, if you have somebody that's getting extra tests so they do well on their standardized tests to get into the school, eventually the equality gets worse and worse and the equality of opportunity. So you have to even be careful with a meritocracy. It's not all about the scores. We can get to that.
Okay, can I just address that before we go to the call?
Sure.
I think that's absolutely right. I tweeted something about that, and what we need to do, this is from John Rawls, what we need to do is we need to focus on equality of opportunity, not on equality of outcome. So one of the things, perhaps for another show, is we need to give every citizen, regardless of race or income, a public education of the first rate. And that is not happening now. And as the most powerful and richest country in the world, that's a national disgrace.
I agree. Jonathan Kozol has a great book, Apartheid Schooling in America.
Yep.
Talks all about Ellen on the phone, thank you so much for waiting. Do you have a question for Dr. Boghossian?
Yes. I was an early feminist back in the 70s, worked on the Equal Rights Amendment, was there in North Carolina when the woman representative voted against it and later had down on the table and cried. But my concern is I don't think today's feminism reflects what we were trying to fight for. I'd be interested, you mentioned that you had concerns about today's feminism. I'd be interested in knowing what those are.
Okay, thank you for the question. I lay my concerns out with feminism, and I lay my concerns out basically that this is a broad answer to your question, but there are values that feminists have adopted. Like the other caller asked about Atheism Plus. There are values that atheists have adopted that have absolutely nothing to do with atheism. I think they're great values, but they just have nothing to do with atheism. And so the problem with contemporary feminism, and we see this in the schism in the atheism movement, which I think is incredibly unfortunate. The problem is that there are values like relativism, like tolerance that's been can't you leave it out to ideas, that and like this bizarre radical form of multiculturalism that have veered or strayed from the original goals of feminism.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So going back to your book, do you at this juncture, do you have any plans to have this book be translated or be in other languages? Or I do most of my reading on audiobooks, I have to admit. I have a 2-hour commute every day, and so that it lends itself for a lot of reading with my ears. And so this sounds like it's a great book that will lend itself for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I did an audio book. I had a great time at the Portland Recording Studio. One thing is I didn't take into account how long it would actually take, but so every chapter has dialogues at the end of the chapter, and one of the things the dialogues do is they take a principle that's in the chapter and they show actual conversations that I've had with people when I use the tools in the chapter. Those are on audiobook, and they're really fun to. I mean, I'm not saying that they are really genuinely fun to listen to. The other thing is, we went right to paperback. Nobody is being gouged by a hardback. I mean, the book is $12, and as you know, the way the book game works, the publisher makes the most of this. This isn't a money-making activity. This is about eradicating the faith virus and moving forward as a species. So nobody's being gouged here. But yeah, there'll be an audiobook, there'll be an ebook. And the audiobook, it's funny, there are some outtakes, and there's a mental sadist that's he plays some of the roles, a professional humiliatrix that plays some of the female roles in the dialogue. And the other one, my friend Matt Thornton, plays some of the male roles in the dialogues. And so the dialogues, then you can actually hear the tonally how they come out. It was fun to make an audiobook. It took a lot of time, but it was fun.
So this book is coming out at the same time as the paperback?
I don't know. That's up to the publisher. I don't know.
Okay. We only have about 12 minutes left. We're going to try to get through some random points in your book just to give viewers an idea of the breadth that you cover.
Okay.
When you first open it, the first words are a quote from Christopher Hitchens. "Never be a spectator of unfairness or stupidity. The grave will supply plenty of time for that." And I just thought that was the perfect encapsulation from your book. You talk about how the Four Horsemen, really gave us a good start. They pointed out a lot of things that need to happen, but we now need to mobilize 1 million street epistemologists to go out and get some work done. You had Victor Stenger, of your work, I'm going to change his quote a little bit, I don't have the exact quote, but it's indispensable for all who must navigate the rising sea of magical thinking that's inundating America. Guy Harrison, it's a crucial tool to bring into the trenches of everyday life, where minds are won and lost in the struggle between reason and madness. And then we talked about Michael Shermer a little bit. But again, you're trying to reprogram minds away from faith and get them to use science instead of superstition. So I like your quotes, and I love what you're doing with the book, that you're trying to mobilize the masses to lead us toward reason.
Yeah, part of the thing is I've been living in such a bubble for so long. This is basically all I do or all I think about, and it's a totalizing activity. When you're in this little sphere, when you're in this little world, you kind of lose yourself. And when I sent the book out, I was blown away by how much people liked it. I was like, I thought it was a really good book, but I just was floored by the exuberant comments of people. But it really is a guidebook for how to talk to somebody, how to talk someone into reason. And no one, as far as I know, no one's done anything like that. There are innumerable guidebooks about how to talk them into some superstition or crazy nonsense, ridiculous belief. But we need to look at faith as a virus, and the people who have these tools, they're giving literally millions of micro-inoculations on a daily basis. If we do this, if we get these, and that's the other idea of going with paperback, if we get these tools in as many hands as possible, we can win this struggle. This is a struggle between reality and madness, and we really can teach people how to have these conversational tools, so that if enough people do this, it will literally be millions every day of micro-inoculations.
Now you see a lot of, I think you see some progress that has been made over the last, say, 4 or 5 years in the United States, where it's moved in the right direction, towards more secularism, I would think. At least some of the numbers seem to point that way. Do you feel that that's the case, or you think we've just been spinning the wheels in the same place, or maybe even going backwards when it comes to secularizing the nation?
I hear conversations about that. I never understood why that question was important, to be blunt with you. I think that as long as we have instances like Kansas, I think you mentioned that on your show with Dawkins, as long as we have instances in which these totally irrational beliefs are bleeding into the public square, then we have work to do. I don't know at what threshold that we would say, okay, our work is done here, but we're not even close to it.
Sam Harris, I forgot what we were talking about earlier, but he had a great little story about President Obama's either chief of ethics, that if she was asked, if every third child's eye is cut out because it's based on a religion, would you condemn that? And even that part, as long as the faith talk is there, even the head of ethics of what we hope was a very progressive president, how silly, what state is America in? So I agree with you about the nuns, and we're getting better in some ways, but a lot of politics is still dominated by right-wing and faith thought, and how can the leader in ethics possibly be that relativistic?
Yeah, that was in the Moral Landscape. That was, and he's one of the people I dedicated my book to him. His work has been very influential to me. But yeah, that's right. The problem is that at almost every level, people want to convince you that there's a synthesis between faith and reason, and I don't know if that's just sheer sheer intellectual dishonesty. I don't know if it's they're afraid of something. They're afraid of people being upset with them or to hurt people's feelings. I don't know what it is, but here's what I do know. I'm offering a solution to this problem. I'm offering a way that if you use these tools, you will be empowered. Someone says something to you, you're a gathering. The guy who my barber is gay, and we were talking about how he's been tormented by religion in his life and what that's meant to him. And so there are segments of people who have been hurt. These are real people who have been hurt, and they've been hurt by the faithful who have based their beliefs. Look, the faithful, for the most part, there are exceptions like D'Souza and Joel Osteen, but for the most part, these are very sincere people doing what they think is the right thing to do. But the consequence of that, of placing their trust in ancient books, is that they've hurt real people. And we need to stop this hurting. We need to stop the Catholic Church, which is the largest pedophile organization in the world. We need to give people tools to deal with this. And I'm telling you, we can deal with this problem. And in terms of your question about having the book translated into other languages, I'm almost positive that the book will be, that's what one of the reviewers said, that the book will be banned, and you'll never get it in other countries. So, I mean, that's unfortunate. It's like I said before, the people who leave my classes the first day when I talk about I teach a science and pseudoscience class, and I name names, Uri Geller and particular psychics who are basically full of beans. The problem is that the people who need the book most are in those societies that are closed. They themselves are victims.
We have a phone call from Jeffkin. Jeffkin, you're on there.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, go ahead.
After your book is released, do you plan on having any public debate?
Can you hear that? He wants to know if you plan on having a public debate after the book is released. And you can talk about your ideas on debates or how effective those are.
Yeah, maybe. Before I debate anybody, they have to pass the diffusibility test. And once they pass the diffusibility test, I've written about that in the book and on my Twitter feed. The moment they pass the diffusibility test, I'm happy to debate them. You have to remember, a lot of times when people engage this, they've already made up their mind beforehand. And so I need to know the conditions under which one would change their mind. If they're just doing this to prove how smart they are, I'm not interested.
Great. All right, in your second chapter, you talk about faith. One of the colorful quotes from there is by John Loftus. Faith is a leap over probabilities.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about faith and the importance of going after somebody's faith, and why that's an epistemology, maybe in a failed epistemology, versus going after God with all the social baggage that goes with that? So kind of going after faith versus God.
Yeah, I'd like to reframe that. It's not really going after anything. It's helping people to understand that faith is not a reliable process that will take one to the truth. And so and I just talked to John Loftus today on the phone, and his work is outstanding, particularly the outsider test for faith. I highly recommend. So the idea is that you don't really talk about God, or you don't talk about politics. You ask basic questions about how people know things in a very, very structured Socratic way that incorporates tools from psychology and cult exiting literature and behavioral interventions and prison interventions. So you have a template that you use, and that you focus your questions on faith, and then you really listen to what someone has to say to that, and then you just follow the template all the way down. There is no defense for believing something on the basis of insufficient evidence. It's indefensible.
We have a couple of more minutes, left, and I'll pick two questions in one, and you can pick what to answer. One is on I can't even say the word,
Doxastic closure, I think?
That's it. And can you explain what that is and why that is important? And second is you mentioned, you have a quote in there, I think you quote yourself, saying change minds and hearts will follow. And I've also heard people say, well, if you change their hearts, their minds will follow. And what are your thoughts about that?
All right, let's see if I can do two of these real quick. There are only two, get an echo. There are only two words in the book that are kind of big words or $2 words, epistemology and doxastic. Epistemology is how you know what you know, and doxastic is the way I use it. It's a belief. It's what people believe, why they believe it. So we need to look at why people believe what it is that they believe so that we can target our interventions, we can target these conversations. And once we understand that, we have a better idea of where people are coming from, and also if we're harboring a belief that's false or untrue. So that gives us an opportunity to change it as well. The target hearts and minds and beliefs will fall. Some people believe that it is not possible to talk people out of their faith. That is empirically false. We know that is demonstrably, absolutely, patently false. People change religions all the time. John Loftus is a great example. People change religions all the time and then go on either to become atheists or what have you.
The second question was Carrie Rafter. You saw a couple times. We wanted to make fun of her. She's producing this today. She makes me read books periodically. One of those was Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. And it makes a metaphor of you have your emotional brain is like an elephant, and then you have your neocortex, which is like the rider. And your intellectual stuff can guide so many things, but it's always the elephant that really runs the show. So we know that we shouldn't eat sweets, but we really want to eat them, so we end up doing it anyway. So I think that was the context of if you change the emotional set of somebody, what do we need? How do we need to reach people other than intellectually about faith to get them to see all the harm that it does maybe, and therefore they do want to go through your steps, become more open, and maybe find better?
Quick answer. There's a line of literature called motivational interviewing that allows people to tap into their internal motivation to change. And part of street epistemology, part of this, taps into that literature to help people go into their internal motivations to change and thus manifest that change externally in their lives, to live better lives and have better communities.
Great. Okay, well, we have just a few seconds left. I want to remind all the viewers that that we depend on your donations. If you want to send some donations to Fairfax Public Access in care of Road to Reason, really would appreciate some help in that area. We can make much better shows and much more intellectually challenging.
But I think on the live stream, sometimes it gets laid over. If we have some donations, I guess we can get a regular count. You can see everything, the full thing. If you have a problem, you can go to our Facebook page, track that down to our YouTube channel, and you can see the entire show. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. We would love to have you back when you have a dull Sunday.
My pleasure. Love the T-shirts.
All right. Bye.